Welcome to the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. Every week, you'll hear strategies for building your online service-based business your way. And now, here's your host, veteran freelancer, author, and TEDx speaker, Laura Briggs.
Hey listeners, if you've ever wondered how on earth you're supposed to get started when you have no experience and confidence, or what things like retainers or working in-house or going exclusive with clients means, this is the episode for you. I'm very excited to chat with my guest expert today about all of these things. So whether you're new or you're experienced and you're looking to tap into some better ways to feel more confident and to really understand the different terms that your clients may throw out to you, this is going to be the perfect episode for you. So welcome to the show, Kim. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for everyone listening?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Laura. It's great to be here. My name is Kim Krause Schwamm. A lot of people mess up that middle name. And I've been in this crazy copywriting business for at least 20 plus years. And I got into it after having a fairly short career as a marketer. But I guess I was a marketer for about 13 years. And part of my job was always looking at copy or even writing copy. And I decided to take the leap way back in 1998, about 7 months after my first child was born. And I never looked back. And I've been able to build a really great copywriting career, eventually getting to the point where I am now mostly teaching others how to build a great copywriting career and be, a much stronger copywriter with my courses and mentoring programs.
I love that because it's a transition that a lot of freelancers ultimately make. It takes them a while to figure out the ropes, and then they kind of see ways that they can give back to the community. I know that definitely inspired me too, of trying to help other people avoid some of the mistakes that I made, or allowing them to kind of have those results a little faster than whatever it took me to achieve.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think what's hard for beginners, and I'm sure you experience this as well, is you have to market yourself with a certain level of confidence for clients to take you seriously, right? No client wants to hear on a call, oh, I don't really know what I'm doing, or I just decided last month to leave my job and do this freelance. But how do you overcome that hurdle of wanting to portray that you have the ability to do the job, even when internally you may not yet feel 100% confident?
Well, I mean, I will just say a lot of us don't feel 100% confident all the time, but it's how you project yourself, right? Mm-hmm. And even if you're just starting out new to copywriting, chances are you've got some other experience that you can draw on and that you already are bringing to the table. For me, it was a little easier transition because I already had established myself as a really strong marketer. I came from a top direct response company, but I still I took on projects not really knowing really what I was doing, but I figured, you know what, I think I can do this. And I would project that confidence to the client, So I think one thing is the self-talk in your head. You don't know what you're doing. I don't know what I'm doing. They're going to find out I'm a fraud. And instead change that to, I can do this. And you know what? I'll figure it out, because you're probably smart enough to figure it out. And if you put yourself out there as a copywriter, you should at least know something about copywriting. You should be a decent writer. If you're not able to do those things, then you probably shouldn't be calling yourself a copywriter. But if you're bringing that to the table, now the thing you have to bring is just your confidence. And part of that is just how you project yourself. And it's even a little bit of faking it a little till you make it. And I don't mean lying about anything or, presenting yourself as something you're not, but it's just believing in yourself and putting yourself out there as a professional.
Mm-hmm. Now, for those people who maybe don't have that experience coming from an employee role or some other type of position where they've built up some of that background, I think one of the potential pitfalls is spending a long time in learning mode. You feel that gap in your knowledge. And so you're like, I need to take all the courses, or I need to go back to school, or I need to get certified by someone. Do you have any suggestions for people to spend the time they need to learn their craft and to learn the business of freelancing, but also not go down that rabbit hole of suddenly that has become 6 months and 8 months and you're still scared to put yourself out there?
Yeah. I mean, The first thing I would do is, even if you're not coming from a marketing background like I did or an established direct response company, you probably know people who might know somebody who could use a copy, even if it's just a small business. There's so many different small businesses out there. And you could even write a few things for a very low fee. I mean, you could do one as a sample to get that out in front of clients, or to do that for a prospective client. And I'm not talking about a big long project, but maybe just an email or some, one page type sample of copy. And you could, so you can start there just with working your existing network. Let everybody, that you are now a copywriter, and you might be surprised the referrals that can come your way.
Yeah.
And all you need is really one or two samples, probably just one even. And then that can open that next door to a potential client, because now you have a sample. You don't have to tell them it's your only sample. You're like, oh, would you like to see a sample of my work? And it's just opening one door after the next from there.
Yeah. And that sample doesn't have to be published or actually used by a client either. I know a lot of people have that hesitation of, well, how am I ever going to get my first client, because I don't have any samples, because I don't have my first client. It's this chicken and the egg scenario. But my first 3 samples were never published anywhere. I created mock blog posts of what I thought would be interesting titles for a blog post in the industry I was interested in working in. So never feel like you have to have that sort of validation of, oh, a client paid for this. And in some cases, especially with certain types of content writing, when you're doing it as a ghostwriter, your clients don't want you to share what you've created anyway. So it's always good to have some samples. But the other thing that I'm taking away from this as well is that at some point you just have to put yourself out there. At some point you have to be willing to try. And it doesn't mean lying to the client saying, oh, I have all this experience and I'm this award-winning writer, this award-winning freelancer. You just need to kind of show your passion and what you have done towards it. So you can kind of pivot that conversation a little bit. Even if you are new, you might say, I haven't had the opportunity to work on a project like this just yet. However, I listen to podcasts about this topic all the time. Or however, I do have a sample that looks like this. Or, you can mention someone whose work that you love following and that inspires your own work and things like that as well. So you've been in the business a long time. I've been doing this for about 10 years. And we probably both have seen there's so many different ways to work with clients, right? I think when you get started, it's like, let me just get one client and one project. But over time, there's lots of different opportunities that can pop up for you. I know, for example, I've been a full-time freelancer in my 10 years. I've been an in-house employee while freelancing on the side twice during that time. So let's talk a little bit about the good, bad, and the ugly, kind of as we pitched the beginning of this episode. Let's start with retainers. Like what works well with retainers? What should freelancers know about potential downsides of retainers as well?
Okay, well, I think, we're making a big leap. Now you've gone from, hopefully you've got some good clients, ideally it's a client that you've worked with before. It's like, you want to just go right from, a first date to getting engaged, right? So you probably should have a few projects under your belt with a client, so you know what you're getting into if you're signing on for a retainer type arrangement. It's not always the case that it works that way, but generally what may happen is you find that you work well with a client, they're happy with your work, they have ongoing needs, you desire perhaps more stability and, having something steady, a steady stream of income coming in. So those are great opportunities to create, sort of a win-win retainer arrangement. And what I would do is I would base a retainer typically on either a fee schedule of services that you provide if you're doing a variety of different things for them, or based on an hourly rate. And again, I usually don't price anything based on an hourly rate because I prefer to do it on a project basis. But with a retainer, there's a couple different models that you really have to look out for. And one model is sort of the buffet, all you can eat model, where it's basically, hey, you're almost like a full-time employee, but there's no boundaries, there's no limits, what they can ask you to do. And I've known people who have been in those kinds of arrangements, and it's terrible.
Oh yeah.
Terrible, not just from the standpoint of how much time that they want, but clients like that tend to be undisciplined because there's nothing that's kind of forcing them. Like if they were working with a freelancer, the freelancer would push back and say, oh, well, this is outside the scope, and or you've made, we've already gone through 3 rounds of changes and you can't change the entire strategy at this point without paying an additional fee. But if you're on one of these retainer buffet models, they can just constantly change, oh, we've decided we're going to have 5 different upsells instead of the ones you just wrote for. And, I'm just giving you an example, but these are the kinds of things that can happen when you don't have the guardrails or the boundaries built into your retainer arrangement.
Yeah, you need to know the client a little bit. And even if you haven't worked with them before, I really recommend a good call with them where you're talking about why they want to hire someone. What are their goals for hiring someone? Have they worked with freelancers before? And during this call, you're taking notes, because not only will it help you draft your proposal of what you will and won't include and what your pricing will be, it helps you figure out if there are going to be some of those red flags. Because I've seen this happen with startups, like where the client is a startup. I've seen it happen when people are pitching themselves as a Jack or Jill of all trades, where they're doing very broad level consulting or digital marketing strategy, and they haven't really pinned down for the client what does and doesn't come with that. And for the wrong kind of client, those boundaries can be pushed because they see it as, hey, I'm getting a digital marketing strategist for nothing, like nothing in comparison to what I'd pay for a full-time employee. I'm going to dump everything on them. So maybe you start by discussing content or social media, but suddenly you're helping them launch a podcast. And now the founders want to write a book. And you're like, okay, this is way beyond what I priced for, which can be really dangerous.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's so dangerous if you're entering into a 6-month agreement, a 12-month agreement.
I wouldn't do anything beyond 6 months. That was another thing I wanted to mention. I mean, you could either build it in that you review things after 3 months if you've really never worked together before, or after 6 months. But even after 6 months, I think you want to revisit the arrangement. It might be that, it needs to be more time, or maybe it's time to raise your fees, or, that kind of thing. So, or it might be something that you just don't want to do anymore. And the other really important thing to remember as you are building up your freelancing business is if you go exclusive or you go with a full-time retainer, you're basically taking yourself off the market.
Yes.
And so should something at some point go awry with a client, or you want to walk or they want to walk, which, change is always inevitable at some point, you're almost like starting over again. And I remember knowing some very established copywriters who found themselves in that situation where they're calling me up asking for referrals, after they've been basically taking themselves off the market for a year or longer. So I'd say they're good for more of a short, part-time basis if you can do it. And it's nice because okay, that's going to cover my mortgage or my basic expenses. And then anything else I get on top of that's going to be gravy. Right.
Yeah.
Just a few things to think about with retainers.
Yeah, I think the danger too is it's very enticing from a financial perspective to see a client with a lot of money on the line for a monthly retainer or even a flat fee project. But that means, like you said, you can't market to other people. And sometimes that money ends up not being worth it because they're really difficult to deal with or whatever. And if you've put all of your eggs in one basket, I mean, I can't tell you how many of my coaching clients this has happened to. They've gone essentially almost full time, or they have like 2 really small clients and this one big client, and they need to fire that client, or that client's business closes, or that client, fires them. And then you're like weeks to months behind on your marketing because you've been so busy dealing with that client that you have like maybe 1 or 2 small clients, but it's not going to make up that financial difference. So you brought back memories for me too, because I know the next the next thing we want to talk about.
Before we go to that next point real quick, because that is such an important point that you should always be interviewing, future, your future clients. I don't mean like interviewing, but you always have to be prospecting, even when you are booked out months in advance or you have a full calendar. And, when we were talking about how do you find those initial clients? Well, it's almost the same thing. I mean, I used to get out to live events. I know many of us haven't had the opportunity to do that over the last 2 to 3 years. But I mean, there was only a handful of events that I could even go to, back then. There weren't nearly as many copywriting events and that kind of thing. But I would go out to like Direct Marketing Association and other types of events, even local small business, owner events. And I would always be able to walk away with at least one or two clients that would, basically cover my entire expense. And I still did that. Like even as a top A-list copywriter, when I was booked out a year in advance, I would go to events and I would schmooze, the clients and at the luncheons and the bars and whatever, and, I was always, keeping my flow of prospects coming in. And if I didn't have, they weren't the right fit or they needed something sooner, I would refer them, I still do a lot of times to other copywriters. And it's kind of what goes around comes around too, so
Yes.
other people will refer clients to you. And so, yeah, you always want to keep that prospecting going. And it's an excellent point. If somebody is just sucking up all your time and energy, they could be gone tomorrow, so yeah, it's good to keep it's almost like an investment portfolio. You wouldn't want to put 90% in crypto, right? And 10% in an index fund and then be like, oh my gosh, the crypto just crashed. And I'm you want to have it more evenly distributed, between different risk pools, if that makes sense.
Yes, always, because you never know what could happen. And I recognize, because I've definitely done it too, I'm not perfect here. You get busy with current clients and you just stop marketing because you don't need to worry about it. You're thinking about, wow, I have so many deadlines this week and next week, but all it takes is one client going away or one person's business changing. And I think the pandemic has really shown us that too. I think people are much more some people are all in on digital marketing where they're ready to hire someone for the long haul, but other people are treating it more as well, I can make this investment for 3 months and then I'll reevaluate and reconsider. And so you can't really keep that in the back of your mind as, oh, well, this client is going to re-sign with me. They're evaluating the constantly changing business and economic climate too. And so you have to be always thinking about, if I lost this client, how would I rebuild and things like that. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Right.
Yeah. You brought up some memories. Go ahead.
and sometimes you want to be free to fire a client. It's time to just move on. I've coached so many people who, they have ongoing arrangements and now it's like they realize I'm way undercharging with this one client and, for whatever reason, they've got other work that's much more attractive and they want to be able to just but if they didn't have that other work that was more attractive, they'd still be stuck working with that client for way less than they really should be charging.
Yeah, it gives you options, which I think is super powerful. When you're marketing and you have a potential prospect on the line, you can look at your current lineup of clients and say, is there someone on this list I'm not thrilled working with? And would signing this new contract give me the confidence to walk away from that project and wrap things up? And sometimes we need that little bit of a push, almost like giving yourself permission. So I want to talk about going in-house because there's a lot of different opinions on it. And I think it can make sense in certain situations. I have definitely done that. I was in an in-house role for a year and a half. And that was after 8 years of full-time freelancing. And I sort of dialed my freelance business down to part-time, but I was very honest coming into that company that I am not giving up my freelance clients. I will definitely not be working with nearly as many as when I was doing that full-time, but I have always felt like being in a full-time employee role it can just go wrong in so many ways. Like we've talked about that with freelance clients, but I feel like in an employee role, especially for people who have that entrepreneurial spirit, it's like this can go a million different ways wrong. And so let's talk about going in-house. I'm curious your perspective, when does that make sense? What are some of the pitfalls to be aware of as you consider that?
Sure. Well, again, I've been not employed by a company for 23 years. So a lot of things have changed, right? In the last couple of decades, but there's some things that haven't changed much. But I will tell you that first off, you've got to be careful if you are looking to be an actual employee with all the nice benefits and paid vacation time, and they're covering your share of the employer's share of Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, et cetera, right? But, a lot of these employee, quote unquote, positions are really 1099. So you're not getting any of that. So you're almost like you're an employee, but you're not really getting the benefits of being an employee. So, you got to go into it with your eyes open, because if you're doing that, make sure you're stowing away money for your quarterly tax estimates, et cetera, et cetera. You're going to have a nasty surprise at the end of the year if you don't. But the main reason I think to go in-house, it tends to work better, I think, when you're just kind of starting out, right? And let's say you want to get into financial publishing, say if that's your thing, right? If you're want to be a financial copywriter, well, maybe go work for one of the big financial publishers in-house. And you're going to get basically paid pretty nicely to learn. You're going to develop a network. You're going to, it might just be a little monotonous, like just cranking out like kind of the same type of copy again and again, but you're going to be around a lot of people, a lot of ideas. You're going to be in an environment to learn. The other thing though, that kind of takes away from it a little bit, but it also can be an added benefit, is now so many companies are doing strictly remote. And while that's wonderful as far as not having to move and avoiding commutes, you kind of lose a little bit as far as that on the fly learning and the relationship building and all that kind of stuff that can happen when you actually physically work in-house. So I think at the beginning of your career or early on in your career, it can give you a huge advantage in terms of, I used to work at such and such company, or you walk away, you have this great network. If you want to go ultimately into freelancing or even starting your own business. I had somebody that mentored with me about 4 years ago. He decided to go in-house with one of the financial divisions at Agora. He worked there for 1.5 years. He greatly increased his income, and he went off and launched his own business with another one of his former coworkers. And, it gave him a great launching pad. Another way to go in-house potentially where you can really leverage it is maybe once you've really established yourself, and maybe you can, negotiate a really nice deal, financially for yourself. There are some companies that will really pay top dollar if you've proven yourself to be a top copywriter. But yeah, I think it's one of those things. It's like, it's hard when you've been freelancing for a while, like you were saying, Laura, and then you go in-house and you're giving up potentially a lot to do that. And you're giving up a lot of freedom. But, honestly, freelancing isn't for everybody. And, there are those of us who really love it and feel like we're basically unemployable at this point, but there's others that maybe they don't want to deal with all this other, stuff, dealing with clients and negotiating things and the possible feast or famine cycle, et cetera. So I think it just depends on what you're looking for, but, you got to be clear, is it a real employee situation where you're going to have opportunities for promotion and all these other great things, or is it a 1099 thing where you're basically like a contract employee? So really look at that carefully.
Yeah, I think there are situations, like you said, when it can make sense. One of the reasons that I stepped into an in-house role was I saw the potential to pick up some skills and to do some learning that I would not necessarily be exposed to on the freelance side. So for example, I didn't know anything about Facebook ads. I was going to get an opportunity to learn from someone on the team at Facebook and run the company's Facebook ads and manage their budget. So I knew whether I stayed in-house or freelance, that was going to be a great thing for me to learn. I also got the opportunity to manage other people because I was promoted to the director level. So I had a team of contractors I worked with and a team of employees that, 2 different teams of employees that I ended up managing. And those were skills that I don't think I would have as easily gotten on the freelance side just because of the nature of that position. But one of the things to be aware of, I'm happy that you talked about that entrepreneurial spirit. There were 2 things that I found really hard about being in-house that I'll just share for other freelancers as things to think about, either to dissuade you from doing it or to know going in, these are potential obstacles. I think one of them is it's not your company. And so when we run our own freelance business, it's very easy for me to decide, yes, I want to do that. No, I don't want to do that. Hey, there's too much red tape in this process. I'm going to make it easier. Hey, I should buy that software to make this 10 times faster. Unfortunately, when you enter a company, especially as an employee, you don't really have that say to be able to say, hey guys, this process is really slow and cumbersome. And why are we doing it this way? Because it's not your company. So hopefully you're in a culture where you can bring those concerns up, but just remember that at the end of the day, you're not the CEO there. You're potentially not even on the leadership team. So that may not be your call.
Right.
I think that was hard. And then I think the second one is there's really no firm way to prevent against scope creep as an employee, which isn't something we really talk about. But if I have a freelance client and I've agreed to do 4 blogs a month, it's very clear the minute they ask me for a 5th blog that I can say, I either do want to do that or I don't, but if I'm doing it, you're paying me for it because that's outside our scope. As an employee, you could be asked to pinch hit for another team while they're on vacation, to pick up extra responsibilities. Your pay may or may not be changing with that, but you feel this pressure to be the team player, and you can't as easily say, I'm sorry, that's not in my job description. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, the whole team player thing, the meetings. I mean, I know
God,
people who
the meetings. I can't.
Oh my gosh,
I can't.
the
When
meetings.
that was a massive reason why I stepped out, because I was like, I'm spending 20 hours a week in meetings. No wonder why I feel like I can never get anything done. And so that's another thing too. We, as freelancers, we can tell our clients, hey, let's do one meeting every other week for 30 minutes, and it'll be a status project meeting. I'm going to control the agenda. It's going to be a tight 30 minutes. We're not going to screw around. When you're part of a team, especially a distributed remote team, you may have like 5-6 meetings a week, some with the whole company, some with your department, some with your supervisor.
Daily check-ins and
it's a lot. So you got to be aware of what
Yeah.
you're trading for that, and think about that. Like we both have said, there's reasons to consider going in-house, but you also have to know, okay, this is what I'm going to give up with it. So real quickly, let's touch on this idea of going exclusive. What does that mean to you, and what do freelancers need to know about it?
Well, going exclusive to me would be basically, it's like having a full-time retainer with a client where you are solely working for them. You might even have to sign an agreement that, you're not going to work with anybody else. And usually you would do that if you're at a very high compensation level, potentially. I mean, I don't know why else you would do it. I mean, if you might as well, it's basically almost like be an employee. But yeah, it's the same kind of thing where it can lead to the scope creep, the crazy, like constantly changing, here's what we're doing. No, we just changed it. Now we're going to do this. And you're just, working till midnight, rewriting everything. I mean, I remember once, and this is as a freelancer, working on a couple of big launches where there were like lots of different moving parts. And I got so frustrated with the client because they, instead of having everything in the funnel figured out, like this is going to be the upsell, this will be the second upsell, and this is going to be the downsell. They were constantly changing it. Like I'd write the copy and then it was like, oh, we decided to change this. So I just got into this mode of I'm doing just-in-time copywriting where I'm going to literally write it like an hour before it's due. Yes. And I knew it wasn't even that hard to write it. It was like, I'm just going to write it last minute. It's not going to be perfect, but that's what they're going to get, right? Just-in-time copywriting. So yeah, I just knew something like that would not work for me. I like to put a lot more thought into what I write. I like to, I don't do well with that kind of chaotic environment. And so I think that a lot of, especially entrepreneurial companies, of which there are so many, they don't necessarily want to have to be super disciplined. And they want people who are they want that unfettered access that they can just, make their demands and here's what we need, and everybody scrambles and gets it done, and it's, in a traditional type of company, you have HR people who intervene, you have, a lot of other layers that kind of help make sure there's more of a healthy employee-employer balance, if that makes any sense. So those would just be some things I would watch out for, just things I've heard through the grapevine, things I've, friends and people I've coached, stories that they've shared with me. You have to watch out for those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so many good tips.
Boundaries are important.
Oh, yes, absolutely. That's like number one lesson for freelancers. And hopefully this has helped open some of the listeners' eyes about different ways that you can work with freelance clients, the pros and the cons of doing it. So Kim, thank you so much for coming on the show. Where can listeners go to learn a little more about you?
Well, probably the best thing to do is to get on my email list, and then they'll get what I call my ultimate A-list copywriters promo checklist, which is really 5 checklists in one, including research and editing, etc. So if you go to copyinsiders.com, you'll be able to get on my email list and get that free checklist.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's great to be here. Great conversation. Thank you, Laura.